Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Surya Prakash Rao and the other organizers of IJCTO. Really a pleasure to be back here. So the topic for this evening is antegrade dissection reentry device-based. Again, it's a slide which many of you might have seen in my talk and in several other talks. There are 4 approaches to CTOs, essentially under the hybrid strategy. You have antegrade wire escalation, antegrade dissection reentry, retrograde wire escalation, and retrograde dissection reentry. Today the focus is going to be on ADR device-based. And the key with hybrid is that these are refractory modalities, so if something doesn't work, switch strategies. Why device-based? Why not just use what we used to do before, which is wire-based or LAST or STAR, etc.? The key differences are device-based reentry antegrade is much more controlled. You can, within a millimeter or two, determine exactly where you want to reenter, which makes it more predictable. It's also more teachable, and ultimately that makes it more comfortable. So we do use the term subintimal many times, but the reality is that most times when we think we're subintimal, we end up being in the adventitia. At least when you knuckle and use crossbars, etc., many times it actually isn't that adventitia. Frankly, those are finer points, and ultimately, like most of us, it's a simple thing. Are we in the lumen or are we in the architecture of the vessel? And that's really all that we care about when we use dissection reentry. And why does this matter? Because patients with complex CTOs need multiple options. No one strategy works every time. And in the interest of time, I didn't show you the different percentages, but on the x-axis, you have JCTO score. So on the left, you have the easier CTOs. On the right, you have the more complex CTOs. And as you can see, wire escalation works really well when you're living in this part of the world. Like, if you are going to take on the simplest CTOs and you're a good operator and an experienced operator, you're going to get a lot of CTOs. But then as you move into the higher JCTO scores, then you need other options. Wire escalation plays a very small role here, about 15 to 20% at best. Retrogrades are about a third or more, and then ADR is about 25 to 30%. And the key point I wish to illustrate, and I've kind of said that before, is that ADR using devices is not STAR, right? STAR is pretty much uncontrolled, leads to more stenting than you need, leads to loss of side branches, etc. If you have a significant side branch in the body of the CTO or the distal cap is at a bifurcation, don't do ADR, whether it's device-based or anything. I mean, you can, there are some high-end solutions, but for the most part, you really want to try and avoid ADR. You either got to get it wire escalation antegrade or you got to go retrograde. So where do we go, where do we do ADR in today's day and age? So when you start off with wire escalation and then you've gone through your sequence, you've tried parallel wire a little bit, let's say, or wire redirect, etc., and it's not worked, then you can use ADR as a bailout strategy. Sometimes you start off retrograde, doesn't work, and there are some solutions by which you can use ADR as a bailout. So you can use it as a bailout, or you can say, I'm probably not going to wire this efficiently because it's really long, or if it's tortuous, it's calcified, whatever reason. Or somebody really, really good has tried and failed wiring it. So I'm just going to accept that wiring is not going to be effective, so I'm going to go subintimal and then re-enter as long as it fulfills a few criteria. What are those? You want a decent landing zone. What do I mean by that? The vessel beyond the blockage has to have enough caliber that you can actually re-enter using the Stingray device. And the other thing is you don't want to do it at a bifurcation because oftentimes you will end up losing one of the branches. Again, there are some solutions, but for the most part, you might end up losing a branch. So don't do it when your distal landing zone is not good or if it's at a bifurcation. So just in terms of pictures, so you want to know where to go. That's number one. And this can be sorted out with IVUS, but typically you want a defined proximal cap because otherwise it's not going to work. When we started hybrid, we said greater than 20 millimeters. This is not set in stone. It doesn't mean you can't attempt to wire something that's 24 or 25 millimeters, whatever. But if it's not working, move on. You don't, and like I said, the distal landing zone, you don't want side branches there. You don't want it at a bifurcation. And you want it to be relatively disease-free. especially when you're getting started, if you go into very, very diseased vessels, you're not going to re-enter, and then you're going to end up getting frustrated. And once again, if ADR doesn't work, then you got to go retrograde at that point. So to reiterate, the goal is not to lose branches and to revascularize every significant side branch that matters to you. This can happen. Crossbars is a device essentially that is a controlled knuckle, okay? It's an elegant knuckle. The tip is 1 millimeter. It's got a blunt atraumatic tip. The job of the crossbars is just to get to the landing zone. So I use the term landing zone. What do I mean by that? That is that part of the vessel beyond the blockage. So once you're there, the crossbars' job is done. And one of two things can happen. In a small percentage of cases, especially when the vessels are relatively straight, it can go true to true. And if this happens, it's game over, you're done. Now the other situation where this happens is in ISR many times. If the distal landing zone is actually within the stented segment, it can end up just going true to true, and then just put a workhorse wire, take out your crossbars, and finish your angioplasty. Now, if this does not happen, and it will not happen in most cases, you're not going to go true to true. You're going to end up going subintimal or adventitia or whatever. You're in the vessel wall, right? So once you're here, now you've gone beyond the blockage. Now our next step is to be able to get back into the true lumen. And that's where the other device comes in, which is the Stingray Balloon. The Stingray Balloon is a balloon that's shaped like a stingray. It's been around for 2 years, so I assume a lot of you have seen it. So you have 3 ports. You have a distal port, mid port, and a proximal port. The distal port is, essentially just continues. The proximal and the mid are 180 degrees apart, and then one will go towards the lumen like this, and the other port will go towards the adventitia. Stingray, so for those that are interested. Here is a long LAD lesion with a defined cap. It's pretty long. The landing zone is not great, but it's acceptable. And there are no significant branches of the landing zone. There are collaterals, but the juicier collaterals essentially go into the body of the CTO segment, and the more distal collaterals are probably doable, but they're fairly tortuous. So I'm going to switch gears. This is the hybrid algorithm that I kept referring to. So what is it? And then again, I'm not going to get into details, but in essence, get bilateral pictures, answer 4 questions, and then come up with your strategy. The 4 questions are: do you know where the cap is? How is the target? Are the collaterals gettable by you? And what's the length of the lesion, right? And now based on the answers to the 4 questions, in this case, the answers are: you know where the cap is, the collaterals are potentially hard, landing zone's okay, and it's pretty long. So start antegrade, and given the length of the lesion, you're going to go ADR, and if it fails, then go after the collaterals. So the crossbars, here's the crossbars being spun. You can see it go from the proximal cap into, you got to spin it really fast, and then it just dive forward. And once it's here, you swap it out for a Stingray balloon. This is the inflated Stingray balloon, and this is the correct orientation. Again, not getting into details of this at this time, but once you're here, now you want to re-enter into the true lumen, right? How do you do that? There is a dedicated wire for this, and there are also some other acceptable solutions for the same. There's a Stingray Wire, which is a pre-shaped wire at 28 degrees. It's got a barb at the tip, and it's got 12-gram tip. So essentially, it's like a Conquest Pro 12 with a barb at the tip. So get your, I'm going to skip the video to the juicier sections. There it comes. And the distal hole will continue in the subintimal space. One hole goes to the adventitia, and one hole goes to the true lumen. And here we know by retrograde angiography which hole to take, right? So it's the one on the left. And once you make the stick, you're going to do what's called a stick and swap. But before I go there, I'm just going to take a minute and tell you what happens if you don't get the correct orientation. You want to see the balloon this way, not facing you. Because if you face you, you don't know which hole is going to be the correct hole. You want to see one line and 2 dots. You take out the Stingray wire and put in most often we use a hydrophilic polymer jacketed wire like the Pilot 200. You get it in through the same hole, And then before you go too far, check by retrograde angiography that you're in the true lumen, and then essentially finish your angioplasty. So that was that. And I got a few more cases in the remaining minute. So most of these cases were during proctoring, and unfortunately we're outside India, but it's all good. So here's an LAD CTO. The operator initially tried wire escalation, seemed really promising, but after a while lost visualization, probably because of hematoma. In fact, IVUS guided reentry was also attempted, and I think it actually made the subintimal space bigger. And then it was like finally, this was in a place where they were really, really good with retrogrades, et cetera, and not really sold on the idea of ADR. So this was kind of done as bailout. But then, so once this then happened, we essentially knuckled the wire, here you can see the boss coming down over the wire, and then lead with the boss. Here is the Stingray Balloon getting to the reentry zone over a Miracle 12 wire. So earlier I said swap out your crossbars for a Stingray, you need a really stiff wire to get the Stingray Balloon to the landing zone. So that's what happened here. And once you are at the landing zone, this is the wrong orientation because you see the wings of the balloon. You want to move your II till you get the correct orientation, which is here. And now, as you can see, the vessel kind of doesn't look great, and even to start with, it kind of seemed like a diseased vessel. And in fact, here we did a slightly different thing called a stick and drive. So I didn't actually swap it out because, and we had to try a few times, but we got it in. Didn't really bother to swap it out, I just did it. This is what we used to do initially, but you know, sticking and swapping is a lot safer. And so once you do this, you swap it out for a workhorse wire over a microcatheter, and then finish your angioplasty. So I guess I'm kind of out of time, but I'll just show you one more case. So here's an RCA. Yeah, here's an RCA. Again, prior attempts had failed, so this is just a knuckle going down over a microcatheter. And once you're in the architecture of the vessel, you bring in your crossbars. You can see it come down right now. And then just went down to the place where we decided to re-enter. So as you can see in real time, you can cross a fairly long disease segment pretty efficiently and pretty fast. Here's the Miracle wire, and the Stingray Balloon comes to position. Here it's good, you're in position. This is a great spot. You do the stick, and then you essentially swap it out. For the pilot here, what we did was a classic stick and swap. And I'll show you the final results here. So once again, you know, this was done fairly fast. And do we have 2 more minutes, or should I stop? Yes? Okay. So I'll just show this last case, and then I'm going to stop and open it up for questions, or we can do it later. So this, again, like I said, this was in a place where they really, really did a lot of retrogrades. And so this was happening in another room. They really wanted to try and get this retrograde, tried one collateral, another collateral, nothing really worked. And interestingly, then had to do an IVUS guided puncture of the proximal cap. And what had happened at that point, though, was there was no vessel. I mean, we couldn't really see anything. And this is a situation where, I mean, really, none of the options at this point look great. It was like, well, this is kind of a lost cause. And then at this point is when I was like, okay, let's try ADR. And the only reason I show this case is just to show that sometimes you really have no other option. And I mean, there are many cases where you could say, well, I could do this, I could do that, and usually that's a good case. And if you have an options case, you know you're going to win. It's a question of how bad is it going to be. Here, it's just, and you don't know that you're going to get it every time, but at least you have one option that might work. So, in fact, what we did here was, at this point, just said, okay, we know we are in the vessel. I'm just going to do this blind. And so, once again, got a knuckle, got a boss, that's the Stingray Balloon coming down. And in fact, I'm just going to go back here. So what I wanted to show you here was you really don't see much of a vessel. So I have no idea if it's on the left or the right. So some of the solutions is like you can do a double, do a blind stick and swap. So stick both ends. So one has to be the true lumen, the other is adventitia. So what do? Stick both sides. And this is just one solution. I mean, there are other things that you can do. But in any case, stick both sides, and then you kind of have to go by feel. Don't take your Stingray wire and go down because it will go. So then we just swapped it out for a pilot 200. The other side didn't go. This is just a fluoro save of the right hole. And it just went. And that was kind of the final result. Again, not a great distill vessel, but at least we got something done. Anyways, thank you very, very much.